Hello, bonjour. Welcome back to Guns Across the Lakes, a virtual series of the Old Northwest in the War of 1812. Last week, our friends at Fort Mackinac began with the epic tale of the capture of the fort on Mackinac Island by British, Canadian, and First Nation forces, the first significant action of the War of 1812. Today, we continue the story from the banks of the Detroit River at Fort Malden National Historic Site in Amherstburg, Ontario, Canada. My name is Alex Dale, and I am an interpretation officer with Parks Canada at Fort Malden National Historic Site. Originally called Fort Amherstburg, it was a headquarters of the British Army's Right Division of Upper Canada, and the garrison here was involved in many of the actions in the Old Northwest during the War of 1812. News of war arrived fairly quickly in Amherstburg. Within days of learning that a state of war now existed, an American mail ship, the Cuyahoga, sailed up the Detroit River on the afternoon of July 2nd. A detachment of the Provincial Marine, under the command of Lieutenant Frederick Rolette, approached the Cuyahoga. Lieutenant Rolette fired one pistol into the air and aimed a second one at the skipper, ordering them to stop. The unfortunate American commander did not yet know that war had been declared. Lieutenant Rolette took command of the ship, but in his haste to overcome the American vessel, he did not bring a British flag. Fearing that the fort's guns might fire on the now captured vessel, Rolette instructed the American bandsmen to play God Save the King so that the music would drift over the river to the fort. Among the items captured included the American General William Hull's invasion plans and army records, as well as his personal diary, which really outlined his fears of defeat and generally his fear of a massacre of his garrison. This was to become invaluable in the upcoming campaign. At dawn on July 12th, the American army under Hull crossed the Detroit River and occupied the town of Sandwich, modern-day Windsor, Ontario. A proclamation dated July 13th was issued, offering personal and property protection to the Canadians. On July 16th, an advance guard from Hull's army met a patrol from Fort Amherstburg at the River Canard. In this brief encounter, one British soldier was killed and another wounded, thus shedding the first blood of the War of 1812. However, General Hull recalled the advance guard back to Sandwich, losing the strategic location of the River Canard. On July 22nd, the U.S. forces returned to the River Canard, only to find that the British had removed the planks of the bridge and stationed the brig HMS General Hunter to cover the bridge with covering fire. That summer, General Hull had also found his supply route under constant threat of attack. Hull sent a force of 200 men to escort a supply train at the River Raisin in Michigan territory. On the way, they were ambushed on August 5th at Brownstown by 25 warriors under Tecumseh, Shawnee chief, and a leader of the First Nations Confederacy. On August 9th, 600 American soldiers were attacked at Mungwagon by about 200 men comprised of British soldiers, Tecumseh's warriors, and Canadian militia. After a fierce firefight, the U.S. troops forced the British and Allies to withdraw, and following this engagement, and upon learning of the capture of Mackinac Island, General Hull retired his forces from the Canadian side to the relative safety of Fort Detroit. British Major General Isaac Brock arrived in Amherstburg on August 13th and assumed command. The next day, he met with Tecumseh to plan their military strategy. After bombarding Detroit from Sandwich on August 15th, the British crossed the river on the next morning. Brock ordered the 41st Regiment soldiers, who had arrived from Niagara, to provide the local Canadian militia with their old used redcoats. This was a ruse again. The idea was to give the appearance that there were twice as many regular soldiers. Meanwhile, Tecumseh employed his own ruse, with the First Nations warriors approaching the fort, actually running in full view on the morning of August 16th. They circled into a forested gully, came down through a ravine, and reappeared at the start to continue the circuit over and over and over again. Seeing this, General Hull was convinced that the First Nations groups who had attacked Mackinac Island had amassed in Detroit. and that there were now several thousand warriors in the vicinity. Fearing that he could not withstand a major assault and not wanting to be responsible for a massacre of his own army, General Hull surrendered Detroit, the whole of the Northwestern Army, and Michigan Territory to the British. Hull was court-martialed for his conduct, and Brock was knighted, though he never lived to know it, as he was eventually killed 2 months later at the Battle of Queenston Heights. But the story certainly does not end there. This is really only the beginning. I will now pass this off to our friends and neighbors on the other side of the river. Make sure to tune in next week to Old Fort Wayne in Indiana to hear another edition of Guns Across the Lake.